We've got an office here in Windhoek, and I'm one of the directors, and Ryan is another one. I'm fourth generation Namibian with a German background, and I can confirm that Austrians and Germans are different. Yes. Is Stephen also on? Do you want to put his screen up? Or anyway, so obviously the last 2 years have been quite difficult for retirement funds, and I wanted to share a thought about the flexibility of investments. We had a meeting at a pension fund early March last year, and there was a big discussion around where the markets are moving and going forward, and special resolutions have been signed to allow people to switch and give them more flexibility towards their investments. And one of the things that happened, that 90% of management actually transferred their money as at the end of March into a conservative portfolio. Markets recovered in April last year, and these members are now sitting with an investment loss of around 15%, which they didn't recoup. So, the question around allowing flexibility is always the big one. And I don't know, Stephen, have you seen something similar where flexibility actually worked out to the detriment of the members?
Yeah, absolutely. Can anyone still hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. Absolutely. There's this idea of timing the market versus timing the market. So we see that over and over again, and it happens like this. So we give people the flexibility, but unfortunately they then turn into their own worst enemy. Exactly like you described. I see that continuously, that people lock in losses because what do we do as human beings when things get bad? We panic. And instead of thinking long term, we see these short term losses, and then we immediately decide, no, I can't lose any more money than I've already lost. I already lost 15%. We disinvest, we put everything into a conservative portfolio, and then we miss the upside again. So yeah, we use this as a tool to handle our own interests, unfortunately. That's why I was asking that question, do we really want to give this flexibility? People really understand this power that we've given to them in order to help or harm themselves?
Yes.
If I can just add my thoughts as well. First of all, Stephen, thank you very much for your presentation. It covers a lot of areas and actually pulls everything nicely together. That one comment I want to make. So I probably have double the experience in the market than you have. That's just shown by my grey hair. But having said that, I do completely agree with you that people, and talking on the asset side, is that you should stay on your path which you thought is the right way to do. And we as actuaries tend to think, when we say long term, we think 30, 40 years into the future. Whereas the normal person in the street will probably think long term is like 3 to 5 years maybe. That's long term for them. And what I've seen over the years, and I've been tracking returns in defined contribution funds since they sort of evolved, I would say, the late 1990s, early 1990s, and the returns given to members was tremendous. They achieved real returns if they stayed in the market over those years. Probably 8% real return, 6 to 8% real return, and that is creation of wealth. Which maybe leads me to another thought I've been having, is that so over the years we said, okay, as you get closer to retirement, you should de-risk your investments, and then the thought of life staging came into being, and it was very much probably linked to what the administrator could manage at that point of time, and that's been evolving and it's been fine-tuned as we go along. My exposure in the Namibian market has been that there is not a really smoothing down de-risking yet. Very few funds have it. Most of them say at age 55, we put you in a conservative portfolio, and that is maybe a rethink we should have. And rather not triggered by turning 55, but rather smooth it over a number of years. But that's something that needs to be evolved, and again, I think it's very much linked to what the administrator can do. So that's some part.
flexibility around letting people work longer and letting people sort of just more flexibility around the retirement age. One thing I've seen in the last year is where employers, after some of the employees had to retire at a certain date, which was end of March last year, it's maybe opening up more leeway towards basically becoming a deferred pension or leaving the money in the pension fund in order just to, if you end up retiring at a date like end of March last year, just to open that up. From my point of view, that's a very a good way of at least having that investment risk in the last few months of your investments. What are your thoughts on that?
Is it for me or Ryan to answer?
I think you first.
Okay, I'll go first. So yes, I agree completely. I remember when I first started working, it'll be 22 years ago next month. So 22 years ago when I started working in a life insurance company, not the one I currently work for, and there was a lady there that was going to be retiring soon, and she was playing around by watching interest rates. She was going to buy a guaranteed life annuity, but she was going to decide her actual date of retirement based on the guaranteed life annuity rates. So she was watching the interest rates, which was the right thing to do. So I agree that people need that flexibility, because if they're exposed to investment markets and they're looking at the price of annuities, then they need that flexibility, but at the same time they need that understanding that they're there and that they can take advantage of the timing. So yes, I love that, but then it becomes this idea of how do we ensure that people have their proper understanding, how do we ensure that someone has a proper financial advice, because there's some really good financial advisors out there and some very bad financial advisors out there also, and people are very dependent on financial advisors. So we always tell as evaluators and as e-consultants, we generally try to avoid giving individual advice to members, and we tell them you must go and get proper independent financial advice. But how do we ensure that is actually happening? So yes, I'm all for such flexibility to the short answer, in order to be able to empower people to look after their own interests.
Ryan, any thoughts from you?
To be honest, I didn't quite hear your statement clearly. Can you just repeat it? I've got an idea what you're saying, but not sure.
It's at the end of March last year. If your retirement date was end of March last year, you were basically forced to retire as at that date. And whether the funds, I've seen a few funds where they now, after that happened, open up the retirement. You still retire on that day, but you leave the money in the fund, and sort of to defer taking your retirement income just in order to save you.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, I fully understand. Thanks, Kel. It's a problem, and I would also see that as an involvement in the team. And here I'm going to do what's been happening in South Africa. You are not allowed to defer your retirement. You just leave the money in the fund, and that's what you're saying. So hopefully, and I must be honest, I haven't checked whether that will be feasible in terms of FEMA, but that might be an alternative. Just one area of concern, and which I've picked up of late in one or two clients, with some clients, is that if you want to retire, don't think a new retirement date is 30th of November. Don't think your money will be available on the 5th of November. It probably will only become available end of December, and by that time the annuity rates have changed again. So it is a very difficult timing game to play, and maybe the industry should think of a smoothing mechanism, either to lock in the rates or something. I don't know, I'm exposed to that, and I'm not a financial advisor, so I look at the bigger picture, better for the group rather than the individual normally. So yeah, I think if industry can work towards that and say, we happy if you defer your retirement, leave the money in the fund, and maybe pay a small admin fee just to cover that the current members don't carry that extra cost. And then you can do whenever it's suitable for you to change into a pension.
Yes, and that point exactly what you said just now about your retirement benefits actually becoming only available a month or two after that. That's my next point, which we haven't touched on, is investment mismatches. And with these volatile markets, I've seen quite some left of your fund credit, but the fund still has to pay you $1 million, so that $100,000, now needs to be absorbed by the reserves of the fund. So, and I think it has become crucial for administrators to do investment asset liability matching a lot more frequently than it was done in the past. I don't know, what's your view on that, Stephen?
Amen and hallelujah, preach. I agree completely. We talked about these things in theory, and we talked about concepts in theory, but an administrator actually has to go and make it happen. And if it's not happening the way it's supposed to be happening, and the assets and the liabilities are not matched properly, then it can be disastrous. So it's crucial. The role of the administrator is absolutely crucial. But having the right systems in place is very, very important. I agree completely.
Yeah, if I can add just sort of coming up the administrators, there is a big responsibility on the individual. It's easy for the individual to blame the administrator of the fund, but I also know for a fact often individuals haven't got their tax sorted out, therefore it can't be paid out, or they're not informing the administrator according to their timelines. So there is a big responsibility. I mean, you work for 40 years, you know you're going to retire next year in May, so you can actually really plan around it if you make the effort. And don't leave it for the last second or after the administrator contacted you 3 times already to say what you want to do. Having said that, so that's sort of the negative part, but I do also think financial advisors also come into the play. They're trying to put a best plan together. That takes time. They may be contacted too late. So it's a convolution of a lot of issues coming together. But if everybody does their part, it should be a smoothing process. I mean, that maybe speaks toward, and I'm sort of tracking the conversation in a different direction, that maybe talks to the reason why some funds actually now offer in-fund pensions to accommodate a smooth transfer of assets, the immediate availability of your income, etc. And for amongst other reasons, there are obviously more reasons, and some negative and some positive.
Yes. Any questions from the audience or from the online members so far?
There is an online question here that I can read to you. This is from Jacob Sear. With the increased life expectancy, one would expect that smoothing strategies or lower exposure to growth assets would be delayed. I don't know if you want to first respond to that point.
Hey, Jan. Yeah, I think, to be quite honest, my personal experience is there's a lot of work still to be done for how to manage a living annuitant's capital and how to de-risk it at what stage. There are a lot of schools of thought. The one thought I've been sort of talking around a lot is saying, in the old days we said, all we want is your pension must increase by inflation year on year on year. I'm fortunate my parents were still living and they're very old, close to 90. And I've seen from 80 onwards, if not earlier, they actually need less money, so you don't actually need pension increases going up the whole time. So what I'm saying through that is, I think that a lot of modeling still needs to be done. I've read in Australia, they're starting to look at it and saying, listen, you need capital, a lot of capital for the late 60s, early 70s, you're traveling, you're doing stuff, and thereafter your lifestyle tapers off. And yeah, so yeah, the short answer, yes, Jan, you're right. The long answer, we haven't done all the investigations yet, not from my side.
Yeah, I mean, what I can add is that this is a very valid point that's been made, because we often see this big disconnect that closer to retirement, we see people being de-risked and being moved into more conservative investment portfolios, something close to cash, and then when they choose the retirement benefit, they don't choose an annuity, they choose a living annuity. Then they get put into an equity portfolio, and then there's a disconnect where they come out of the market and then they suddenly go back into the market. It can be a mismatch also in terms of the decisions that they've made, what the advice they've been given versus what has put into place for them. So that also becomes tricky. You're right, it's also saying that I've seen documents about this also where they talk about initially when you retire, then you enjoying the good life.
Yeah, one needs to think of the general population, and you're right there. But even though I'm supporting my gardener, he's retired, and I can see he's actually he's adequately provided with this, well, I believe the support I'm giving. I'm keeping in contact with him, and his lifestyle has also tapered down. His needs has reduced. He's now in the Eastern Cape, living in his place there. Definitely, it's a retirement lifestyle.
Everybody who's linked to right now sounds very healthy, so I think we must be taking health tips from Brian.
You want to work for me?
I do, you don't want to. Stephen, another point that you mentioned earlier was how the regulators are allowing for this COVID situation. One of the points was that, they allow access to money or to retirement savings earlier or at a higher rate or something like that. Isn't that just pushing the problem forward?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we as pensions actuaries, we speak from our ivory towers, and we focus on one thing, which is saving for retirement adequately. So I come from this background where we thought that this is the right thing to do. You need to build up your retirement savings. You mustn't allow early access to your retirement savings, and you must build it up to a point where you're going to retire. And then so there's an accumulation phase and there's an accumulation phase, and that's the way it's supposed to work. And unfortunately, the reality for many people is that that's not how their lives work out in practice. So, like I was saying earlier, you've got people supporting children or they're supporting grandchildren and they're going into their 60s. When you look at they're still working, and it's like a delicate balancing act that you have to try and get to in terms of giving people enough flexibility so that they can survive, but at the same time not giving too much flexibility that they can shoot themselves in the foot with it. There's a risk either which way we go. So we allow people to reduce contributions, we allow people to have early access to the retirement savings, we're then depleting the retirement savings. When we keep hearing the statistic about only 6% of people who go into retirement are actually able to look after themselves in the same way before they retire. We have these typical industry quoted replacement ratios where something like 10%, 15%, 16% average replacement ratio of pension compared to salary at retirement. We've already got this massive problem in industry. Now, when you're crazy person, you're talking about allowing people to reduce contributions without the access towards retirement savings. But we see people taking drastic action. I mean, we see people that resigning so that they get access to the retirement savings earlier because they've got some desperate need for it. So they're shooting themselves in the foot just to be able to get that flexibility that they don't have. But do we allow them more flexibility? What do you mean? Someone was disagreeing with me right now, wanting me to stop talking, so they muted me, so let me stop talking.
No, please don't.
I fully support you, and I made a note here on my pad saying it's a question of no, I'm struggling with the word. Thanks. There's a trade-off between how much you tell people what to do because you're supposed to know better. We are fiduciaries, so we try really think about our members and try to get the right solution. And maybe the way to deal with it is saying there should be a minimum default, and then you give a flexibility about that where people can play around with how to apply. So very simplistically, and it can be done saying, okay, 10% of your contribution should be split between a minimum death benefit and a minimum contribution rate towards retirement. We know that's not adequate. And then a balance of, say, 5% above that, you can flex where you want to put it. Again, it brings complications in, and I think that one part, and we all realize it, and we know things are evolving quite quickly, fortunately, is the education of members. If you give flexibility, you need to educate members and educate in a positive way to understand what their choices are and what they're actually choosing, the impact of that. So maybe for choices, a way of example, I like examples is I recently had a client where a member who wanted to go 5 years before his normal retirement date. And we all know, simplistically, your first reaction is it doesn't make financial sense. Okay, he wanted to do that because he wanted access to his money, which we understand. But fortunately, a well-drafted correspondence was presented to him, and he actually changed his choice. And I think Dirk, you were also involved in that. It was easily $400,000 different in value is retaining by staying disabled. So again, it comes back to the education and understanding what it means. Not look at it from immediate money in the hand issue, but rather what you're giving up in future.
Yes,
just on that one, Reinhard, my wife's uncle, it was about 2 years ago, he also asked me for advice because he's on disability, he's got 3 years to his normal retirement age. Exactly the same thing, he wants to access his retirement savings because he wants to start a business. So do I think it's a good idea, should he retire early when he's getting paid a disability income benefit so that he can take his money out and start a business? And I said, no, that's the worst thing you can possibly do. I explained to him, no, please don't do that, uncle. And so he didn't. I was very relieved that I could stop him before he did that. But it's just that, we do sometimes get inquiries like that also at work, where people on retirement funds want to retire early from income replacement disability benefit. Like he wants to what? But we have to sit and explain. When we explain the situation to the people, and because they want to give up, then they do generally make the right decision.
Yes, thank you. Stephen, one thing you've touched on is this two-part approach where you've got access to the one.
Returns, or we're trying to get that balance in this perspective. It's not just all about the dollars and cents, it's just about trying to get balance. And sometimes we can be thinking wise but pound foolish, the expression that is UK. Hence the pound foolish idea that we chase after the short-term returns, but the long-term, what is the true impact? We're destroying the planet that we live on, where we're increasingly destroying our society. We're building up a situation where we're giving a pensioner a pension that's 80% of his salary at retirement. He's having to support his children and his grandchildren in his old age, and how would really benefit the individual. So all we're saying is that there's a bigger picture issue that we need to consider here. Which is more so as I get older and older, as I start getting the great list up and up, realize.
Reinhard, you wanted to say something?
Stephen, I fully agree with your statements. The history is very interesting. I think the principles of 100%. Unfortunately, there are competing forces in that dynamic. And at this stage, there's also, in a sense, a sort of hides on facts. Like, okay, everybody must now drive an electric motor, but the cost of producing that motor is far more negative in the environment than just using combustion engines. For instance, not all, but that's a way of example, producing the chips and the batteries and whatever. That has got a big requirement. Okay, now you do it down the line, you give credit, so the production facilities must be more aware of what they do to the environment. So yes, it is the right thing to do. Just a thought, and some people know me, I like these hot thoughts. So actually nobody is actually addressing the problem is by reducing the population. That should also help. And that I mean by birth, not by killing people.
Thank you. Right.
How are we doing with time? Civil?
Just one last question, perhaps.
Okay, is there any question here in the audience?
I have one.
Okay, you go for it.
Okay, Stephen, Reinhard, Stephen, you mentioned something very interesting about the power of defaults. So, do you think that the Namibian average employee is financially equipped, taking into account the level of financial advice as well, to actually make sound financial decisions about their retirement and the future of their investments? Should we then really consider opening up investment choice on a member level?
Yeah, thanks for that, Sidwell. So the short, horrible, nasty answer is no. That the average member of a retirement fund in South Africa, in Namibia, in Botswana, in Lesotho, in Swatini, and probably internationally, the average person is not really properly positioned to be able to make that decision. When you join a new company and then you get given this document and says, right, welcome to company ABC and following rules apply and blah, blah, blah. And the one section is about the pension fund, and now you join the pension fund. And you must decide what is the contribution rate that you're going to make, and what is your debt benefit going to be, and what is your investment strategy you're going to choose, etc., etc. Most people are not properly positioned to automate the choice because it depends on what you think investment returns are going to be for the next 20, 30, 40 years before you retire. It depends on what your exposure to risk and things of life, things your health with your parents and your grandparents, and how long you expect to live. It depends on your children and on health. It depends on so many different factors, which is why we end up as employee benefit consulting side where we advising retirement funds. When faced with individual members, we have to tell them eventually this, you need to get an individual, personal financial advisor to sit down with you and help you make decisions, for example, when it comes to retirement, about the choice of annuity and what you do and how do you face these different risks. But for individuals within retirement funds, I don't get that sense that the average member is well equipped to make these decisions by himself or herself, which is why it's so important that we get the defaults right. Because most people realize this. So the combination of fear and apathy, so the people are too scared to make a decision. It's better that someone else makes a decision for me. Why? Because I can blame that decision if I don't like the outcome. Or they need to look at it, they need to do the research, and they need to get around to doing it, and they don't even get around to doing it. So it doesn't happen. There's a member, a lady who lives in Gauteng. She's a member of a retirement fund that I evaluated to. And every few months I hear from her because she gives me a phone call and I'm like, okay, well, this is what I think, blah, blah, blah. And then she says, okay, I'm going to go and chat to someone else now. Okay, cool, you go and chat to someone else. And then she goes to chat to someone else. And eventually she and her husband make up their decision based on all this different free advice that they try and squeeze out of people. And they can do this because it's one lady that's in front of the often asking these questions. I couldn't do it if all 450,000 members of the Commission on Credit Fund all mutual funds were doing it. But that's the idea, that people need to be trying to get this wide range of input and then make an educated decision. And after she'll tell me, okay, I made the right decision here, I didn't make the right decision there, etc. So someone's become like a personal friend of mine, a friend of my family, ask me about my family, ask about their family. But that's the sort of input that people need, and they need to have this wide range of thought process that they're applying. And most people don't have the time, most people don't have the energy, most people don't have the inclination to do that. Which is why it's become so fundamentally important that trustees design these great default strategies that will work for the average member. So like Ryan was saying before, what's going to be best for the group? What's going to apply for the group as a whole? So what should the default contribution rate be? What the default risk benefit be? What is the default investment strategy? In South Africa, we've got default annuities also, which are actually more, you have to opt in, not opt out. So it gets to all these different nitty-gritty details that are so crucially important because it's such a difficult decision for members to make. Ryan, I don't know what your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks. No, 100% agree. I just want to sort of add to that. Just think about it. So we start working for an employer our whole life from age 25 to 60, say. We earn getting a salary. We don't need to think about it. We get an income. There we go. Now, quite suddenly you reach 60 and you have to decide what to do with that money in your own capacity. You're not geared for that. And that leads to, okay, that's investment in your retirement. But you start with the process. When you start contributing and say, where do you want to invest money? Again, you're not geared for it. The reason, probably why investment choice is there. It's a need for one or two individuals out of the thousands who've got special needs. They want that to be addressed. But otherwise, the man on the street wouldn't know better. But it is a sexy thing to do investment choice. Just remember that. How it's nice to chat to your neighbors and say, I made this good investment choice. You don't mention the bad ones, but that's unfortunate, the psychic of it. And I do believe that investment choice should be made available. It should be limited. So don't give 100 different portfolios, which effectively, in a way, 80% does the same thing. Give a diverse choice, a limited, and then again with education, Stephen, you probably saw it as well, and Dirk, you as well, and your involvement in funds. People don't actually exercise choice that much. And of those who exercise that choice, 50% do the knee-jerk reaction, wrong choice thing. So that, yeah, that's the thought I had. Maybe if I might end up, and that is choice and investment, and closely linked to investments, obviously the replacement ratio matter you referred to, Stephen, as saying people are not having adequate money to retire on, the replacement ratio is too low. I think that's a narrative, a selling narrative in a sense, because what I've been doing on the defined contribution fund, some of them I've been tracking years of service versus your pot of money you save, and then just compared it with the old defined benefit formula of 2% times month, service times salary, and they sort of get to the same answer. So people are not getting less than they did before in the defined contribution scenario. It is the preservation issue. Everybody says that that's a pot of money you have in the letter, and that's only for the past 10 years you've been a member of this fund. What about the 30 odd before, and what happened with that money? So I think there's a lot of mis-selling or frightening the public about you're not saving enough, and I think all of us are guilty on that. Yeah, so to end up an anecdote, what you do if you're a good consultant, Stephen, you say you frighten the person, then you confuse them with all the answers what you can do because of this. Okay, those were my thoughts, and great chatting with you, Stephen, and
Thank you. One last thought from my
Just
side.
one other thought I wanted to share was just something that leaps to mind is the idea of converting from defined benefit funds to defined contribution fund. And so the one thought I was saying when I was speaking is about the way that the world of work has changed. In the past, people used to work for one company for life, basically, and now we often change jobs on a more regular basis, and that's why preservation has become so important. But what I was thinking was about, if you go back to the 90s when retirement funds were generally converting from defined benefits to defined contributions. Why was that happening? Because the sponsoring employers were saying that this isn't what we signed up for. We don't understand this concept of investment strategies and investment volatility, etc., etc. We want out of it. So what did we do? We took that same risk. The risk didn't go away. We just moved it to someone else. We moved it to the factory workers and the people on the street and said, right, that risk is now yours to deal with, yours to manage. So we moved it from a company that's got a financial director who said, listen, I've got enough issues of my own to worry about. I can't get involved in this pension funds, investment strategy issue. And we moved it to somebody who was just trying to make ends meet from month to month. And so that's just sad in my perspective. I look at my 22 years in this industry to say that this is the risk that people are facing. And it's just to add to it that education is so important. Communication is so important. There is a lot of confusion. I haven't finished my master's degree still, but I'll get around to it one day. When I started working on my master's degree and writing about pension topics, then what I found very sad was that I kept being told by my supervisor, who comes from like the social security, public sector kind of perspective, that you're using too much terminology. I don't follow what you're talking about, and I've been working in pensions for many, many years, and she was in consulting for many, many years. I'm like, but that's the terminology. That's what it is. Just disconnect, because from the industry side, as actually as consultants, we're so used to using this terminology. She's like, what are you talking about? So I agree that there's a lot of confusion out there, and we need to improve ourselves also as their advisors and try and make things clearer and make things easier to understand.
Thank you, Stephen. One last thought from my side on your question, Situl, is whether the average Namibian worker has got the financial capabilities of, of making a choice in a flexible investment environment or a default strategy. And my personal thoughts are, if you have a default strategy with an option, flexibility, it's management that's at risk, because they are the ones that think they can time the market and make the right decisions. So, yeah, that is from me. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Reinhard.
Thank you.